Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are going to talk about more spoilers for Shadows of the Galaxy. So as usual, all those talks are still my first impression. I still haven't played with any of the cards from Shadow of the Galaxy. I'm still waiting for at least 80 to 90% of the set to be revealed before starting to do serious playtesting on the set and see what I can input those cards into context. And for now, I'm just gonna read those cards and tell you what I think of them just after reading them and maybe putting them a little bit in context of what they can achieve uh, from what we know. So without further ado, let's go to our first card, Wren Rescuer. So Wren Rescuer is one of those units that is a unit that gives experience to other units, similarly to Wing Leader, which is a pretty powerful card. This card has a couple of advantages and convenience. Of course, 1/2 on the ground, far worse than a 2/1 in space. And also gives only one experience token, but it does cost one less. And one of the big factor with Clan Ren Rescuer is the fact that he can give an experience token to himself. That means that at the worst case scenario, you get a 2/3 for 2, which is not great, but not horrible. And obviously, it can be much better than this. I feel like this card is going to be mostly a card for the upgrade Mandalorian deck because there are several Mandalorian units that basically get additional bonus when they get an upgrade, and an experience token is an upgrade. So I feel like it's a very cheap way to kind of boost an additional unit while adding a unit on the board. So I think the card is pretty decent in that context. Will it I think by itself, I don't think it's going to be strong enough to really see play in a regular deck, but I think specifically in that deck, it seems to be the kind of card that you would want. Is it going to be strong enough for this deck to be good? I don't know, but definitely a card that I think is playable. I put it a 4 out of 10. Maybe 4 out of 10 is a bit rough. Maybe a 5 out of 10 would have been more appropriate. But it's not a great card, but I think in the right deck, I think it's playable. Next, we got the Oak 290 Freighter. This card is very vanilla, and unfortunately, most of the units that you want to interact with in Star Wars Unlimited have 3 HP in space. So we're talking about the A-Wings, the X-Wings, the Arc 170. All those cards basically have 3 HP, so being a 2/5 is kind of a big problem. Um, is kind of a big problem, and obviously no immediate impact on the game and no abilities makes this card pretty weak. I think it's 2 out of 10. I don't think it's going to be playable in constructed. In limited though, I think it's okay. Next we got the Survivor Gauntlets. As a pretty decent stat, 4/6 for 5 in space is really not bad. But once again, we're talking about a pretty expensive card with pretty much no immediate impact. So yes, it has this one playability that allows him to switch an upgrade from a unit to another unit, but that is an ability that I feel like is fairly situational. So fairly situational ability when played, which means that most of the value of this card is going to come from the 4/6 body, which is not really truly enough to kill the important stuff that you want to interact with in space. Like for example, getting rid of a fire spray or something like this. So I'm not really super convinced that this card is going to see a lot of play. Maybe there's going to be some powerful synergies with the ability. We'll see how it goes. For now, I rate this card a 4 out of 10. Once again, it's very hard to see how potent is the being able to switch and upgrade ability is going to be. My opinion is, at first glance, it's like it's going to be fairly situational, but I could be wrong. We'll see how that goes. But for now, this card's 4 out of 10. Next, we got Public Enemy, which is one of those zero-cost bounty cards, which I think are going to be very important for the bounty decks to actually work out. And it seems to me that bounty is on every color. Every colors is getting some sort of bounty cards. And blue has actually some of the most powerful bounty enablers that we've seen, and notably the client, which has this ability to kind of give a bounty for free every turn. I think is very potent. So here's another way to give a bounty. It's I think the fact that it's absolutely free is kind of a big deal. And giving a shield to a token to a unit, any unit, including leaders, I think is a pretty powerful reward for zero cost bounty. So I think this card is pretty good. I get this. I gave it a 6 out of 10. And the reason why I give it a 6 out of 10 is like as opposed to other bounty like the one that deals 2 damage to base or the one that untap resources, I think those are a little bit less situational. I could be wrong. Maybe this card is a 7 out of 10. I don't know, but I think this card is going to be one of those bounty enablers. So if you're playing a bounty deck with blue, you absolutely I think you're most likely going to be playing this card. Um, Another card is Foundling as a +1/+1 for one that gives someone Mandalorian trait. I think this card is pretty mediocre. It's kind of like giving a unit like a trait is not really that big of a deal because pretty much right now the bonus that you get from being a Mandalorian is relatively mild. I mean there are some cool effect with it, but then don't you just give play a card that gives something significant to the unit? Like for example, we've seen um, a card that gives +1/+1 and Saboteur for one, which is a pretty strong keyword. So what would you um, give the Mandalorian trait that doesn't do anything on its own and then have to play another card and interact with another ability to have an actual bonus? Instead of just, you would rather just play a card that immediately gives something significant to the unit. So, in my opinion, I don't think. I think it's very unlikely that there's going to be Mandalorian synergy that are powerful enough to be that it's going to make this card playable. So I think I rate this a 1 out of 10. I'd be very surprised if this card sees any competitive play. I could be wrong, but it's going to require some really seriously, massively important Mandalorian synergies with a non-Mandalorian unit that a specific combo like for this card to see any play. And I just give it the 1 point just for the benefit of the doubt here, because I think even in draft this is not the kind of card you're looking for. Next we got the Mandalorian armor. So the Mandalorian armor is very nice. It's a card that I feel like nobody has talked about. Maybe I haven't looked at the right place, but a lot of people made a big fuss about the Boba armor because of the ability to make basically Boba pretty much invincible, at least invincible towards decks that don't have those specific answers like Power of the Dark Side or Super Laser Blast, and for good reason. I mean, this is very making your leader almost invincible is a very strong ability, and I feel like Mandalorian armor pretty much does the same thing for any Mandalorian leader, and that includes also the Mandalorian himself, which also has an effect whenever you are playing a vehicle, playing an upgrade. So this card is basically you play this on the Mandalorian leader. It will basically exhaust an enemy unit right away, so it has going to have an immediate impact, and then it's going to make your Mandalorian extremely difficult to kill because he's going to have 10 health plus a shield on him. Very tough to get through that through normal means. And then the +1 attack bonus also very relevant, brings your attack up to 5. So I think this card is fine on other Mandalorian units, but I think you're going to be looking in priority to place this on your leader. Generally speaking, I have to say that upgrades are far stronger on leaders than they are on units, because on unit there are a lot of cards that can affect them, while on leaders far fewer cards actually affect leaders, making upgrades on leader very powerful in my opinion. And this one is no exception. It makes really your leader extremely difficult to kill, and for a relatively cheap price. So I think this card is pretty good, and I rate this card 8 out of 10 because I think that if you're going to be playing the Mandalorian, and it's a strong reason to be playing Mandalorian blue, because simply playing that card on your Mandalorian becomes invincible, and really the Mandalorian is the kind of leader that really I think gains in power at sticking on the board because of his tapping ability. So I think it's just a very I think it's a very good card. Next we got Vras grabble shot. So basically, so it's basically a +2/+2 for 2 restricted to non-vehicle. So uh, a lot of people would be very excited. So this card is not so different from the card we've seen before, but here this time not giving a shield. So it doesn't really have the ability to really make your leader like nearly as resilient. And I also think that on the leader a +1/+3 is more valuable than a +2/+2. But really what makes me really skeptical on this card is the fact that when it comes into play, basically the on attack effect is that it provides is very weak. Basically being able to attack exhaust a unit that you're attacking is extremely situational, because most of the time whenever you're attacking a unit you want to kill that unit. You do not want to you want to defeat that unit. You don't want to just exhaust it and just deal a bit of damage on it. I guess there's going to be scenarios where this might be useful, but I would say that 99% of the case, this card is simply going to be a +2/+2 for 2. Well, you could say, well, +2/+2 for 2 is not so bad. You have a card like Academy Training, which is not unplayable, and but Academy Training, actually, one of the main advantages of Academy Training is that it can be equipped on ground unit and on space unit, while this card is only on non-vehicle units. So that's also a pretty big restriction. So I rated this card a 2 out of 10. I think it's a lot worse than and I think there are far better upgrades to be playing for that cost, notably the Mandalorian armor that we just talked about. Moving on, we got Fel the Dragon, which is basically the reverse takedown. It defeats a non-leader unit with 5 or more power. So in my opinion, this card is significantly weaker than Takedown, because Takedown can affect leaders. And I think there are more units in the game that has 5 HP or less than there are units that are 5 attack or more. So it affects more units, and without being said, I think the more accurate comparison would be to compare it with Vanquish, which Vanquish has the advantage of getting basically of killing things of any size. And Vanquish is not usually played because it's an amazing card, but it is played simply because it deals with the type of card that Takedown cannot get rid of. And this card, in the majority of the case, will do the exact same job as Vanquish, but for one less resource, which is pretty attractive. There are a few units that Fel the Dragon cannot kill that Vanquish will. Like I think the biggest example is probably Ruthless Raider. So Ruthless Raider, which is a card that sees significant amount of play, cannot be affected by Fel the Dragon. Also, all the 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 I would say the Inquisitor, the Grand Inquisitor package, and stuff like this. So basically, it's very hard to predict how much play this card is going to see, because it's going to depend on the meta. It's going to depend on how many of those cards actually see play. Another thing I want to say as well is that even though ideally you do not want to kill small units with Vanquish, there are situations where having the flexibility to be able to do that is quite valuable. And the fact that Fel the Dragon cannot kill small units as opposed to Vanquish is also kind of a big deal. So it's going to be hard to say if all this downside is worthy of costing one less, but I think the card is definitely in the realm of playable. And I also can see, especially in hard control decks, a world where this card would be played alongside Vanquishes and alongside Takedown. So I rate this card a 7 out of 10. Maybe it's a little bit generous, but it really depends on the meta. This card can really swing widely from, I think, a 8 out of 10 to a 6 out of 10, or even a 5 out of 10, depending on the meta. Next, we got Outland TIE Vanguard. So this card is pretty weak, very weak stat line. The fact that it gives an experience token to another unit that costs 3 or less, it's restrictive. It's only one experience, and the fact that it cannot give the experience token to itself is also kind of a big deal. So in my opinion, it is significantly worse than the 1/2 that we saw earlier. And the curve, you see, also doesn't really work out. You could say, oh yeah, you want to play this with you play TIE Fighter and then you play Outland TIE Fighter to give that card to, an experience, but then the problem is that you cannot really do this on turn 1 because Outland TIE Vanguard costs 2. So I just felt like the card is a little bit awkward in terms of curve, and very, very limited, and very narrow. The effect is very narrow, and it's not even that powerful to begin with. So all those factors combined make this card pretty mediocre, and I give it a 1 out of 10. Next, we got Remnant Reserves, which is a pretty sick card here. Basically, you're paying 4 and you're getting 3 cards. So in terms of card advantage, it's pretty insane. As I said many times, card advantage tools in Star Wars Unlimited are not the most valuable, especially card advantage that do not impact the board. But this card in certain decks might be powerful enough to make the cut, because you're drawing 3 cards for 4 resources. But there's a couple of caveat here. The first caveat, of course, is you can only grab units. So that means two things. First of all, you're going to be limited in what you actually can get from this card. And the other limiting factor is the fact that you need to have a very, very high density of units in your deck to make this card reliable. Because if you want to reliably see 3 units out of 5 cards, that means that more than half of your deck have to make it up to a unit. And if you want to make this really reliable, you're going to have to have at least 80% of your deck being units, and that's a very, very big constraint. And I don't think the card is powerful enough. So if you are playing a deck that happens to be playing 80 to 90% units already, and you're looking for a card that will help you fight against control, then I guess this card could be a good fit, but that seems to be very niche. So we'll see how that works out. But for now, I give this card a 5 out of 10. Maybe it's a little bit generous. I think it's playable, but it's very narrow. So maybe I should give it a 4 out of 10. I don't know, but it's to me it sounds like the card is just a little bit too narrow to deserve too narrow, and also not cheap at all. 4 is not cheap for a card that has no impact on the board. So as I said, it's a sideboard card for very heavy unit-based deck against a very controlly deck, which we've seen in the meta, but then this is really what this card is all about. Next we got Warzone Lieutenant. Yeah, so simply a 2/2 for 1. So it's funny because there are a lot of 2/2 for 1 with very strong abilities, like for example Benthic 2 tubes that basically don't see any competitive play, even though they actually have some pretty powerful synergies with existing leaders like Leia. And the big reason for this is simply because the 2/2/1 stat line is way too weak. And in order for 2/2 for 1 to have any sort of playability in Constructed, it needs to have an immediate impact on the game, like for example Spectral Soldier. And obviously, so this is obviously a pretty bad card. It doesn't even have any good trait. That's just a trooper trait, which is really not enough. In my opinion, this is the worst card that we've seen in the set, and it is probably not even playable in draft. I think even in draft, you're not going to be happy to be putting that card into your deck. So this is if it is the first card in the set that I'm going to rate a 0 out of 10. There's really simply no reason to play this card, and even play it in your, I would say even play it in your draft deck is going to be a stretch. Like I think that in a draft deck you're going to be very unhappy if you have to play this card. Next we got Kisak Heavy Fighter. This card is also pretty mediocre. A 3/3 stat line for 4 is pretty bad. The ability Overwhelm is not really that big of a deal for such a low stat line, and the ability is also very difficult to use because of the it requires another unit to be exhausted, and even if you do happen to have a unit, then having to exhaust that unit to make this work, and the bonus you get as a result is really not that impressive as well. Because here's the thing, it's also very slow. You have to exhaust the unit. Oh no, it's on attack. Okay, so it's on the same action. That's fine. But yeah, also no Revenant trade. This card is pretty bad as well. No, I don't think there's any reason to be playing that card into your constructed deck. Moving on, we got Discerning Veteran. I wanted to be excited about this card because it's just I was really looking for a unit that could be a removal on a unit that would be great to use on U-Wing Reinforcement. But I don't think this is the card we were looking for. The price is expensive, the stat line is pretty mediocre, which is very relevant because this unit will have to stay in play if you want the captured unit to be there for relatively permanently. And the fact that it cannot target leaders, and the fact that it can only be ground units. If you really want to deal temporarily with a unit, I strongly advise you to simply play a Leia. Okay, it's only going to exhaust it, but here it's capturing. It's capturing is not really that much better than exhausting in a lot of situations. And there's also so many strong counters to captures that we've seen in the deck already. Between Unexpected Escape and L337, like there's just a lot of great answer to captures in the deck. So I wanted to be excited about this card, but the ground limitation, the non-leader limitations, the relatively bad stat line, all those factors combined makes this card, in my opinion, not worthy to be played. I still give it a 4 out of 10. Maybe it's a little bit generous. Maybe capture is going to be stronger than it is. Maybe there's going to be ways to protect your units to make the capture a lot more reliable. Because at the end of the day, it's still a card with immediate impact on the board that comes into play. And that gives you a unit as well as managing enemy units, and all those factors made me rate this a 4 out of 10, but I think it might be, I might have rated this a little bit too high. We'll see. Legal Authority is another card that I'm not super excited about. Once again, it's very conditional. You need to have a unit in play. You need to have a non-leader unit in play that has less power than the unit that you're going to be capturing with, and the +2 health is okay, and then you have to pay 2 for it, so it's fairly situational. It's not that cheap, so it's okay, but I think there's going to be some situation where you're going to be playing this card and it's going to be a blowout. You're going to do very well, but I think in the majority of the case, this card seems to be just a little bit difficult to play. So I rated this card a 4 out of 10 again. Once again, kind of giving it the benefit of the doubt, hoping that there's going to be some sort of capture synergy that's going to make those cards better. But for now, it's hard for me to rate this any higher than this. And I might add, this actually might be a very generous rating as well. Next, we got Outflank, which is basically Rebel Assault, but that can affect any type of unit, but doesn't give the +1 attack bonus. So there's several weaknesses to that card if you compare it to Rebel Assault. The fact that there's no +1 attack bonus is a pretty big deal in an aggro deck. The fact that it's not heroism, which means that it doesn't work with for a cause I believe in, which is kind of a big deal. But I would say that obviously as the time goes by, we're going to have maybe a smaller proportion of rebels in the set, and having this kind of effect available to a deck that is not heavy on rebels or doesn't play a lot of rebels, I think is going to be quite valuable. So because even the Leia ability requires rebels as well, so having this kind of like action cheating ability in an aggro deck that doesn't play rebel is going to be quite valuable. Also, this card works for can be played in villainy decks. So for all those reasons, I give this card a 6 out of 10. As of now, it does not replace Rebel Assault, but who knows? I will not be surprised if there's going to be an aggro deck that's going to need that type of card in the future. Next, we got Moment of Glory. So temporary stat boost that do not allow you to attack with a unit right away. So card like Tactical Advantage or Pattern Assault Delta have been pretty terrible, and the reason for this is very simple. You give the buff to the unit, and then your opponent has an interaction to actually interact with said unit. And even though the boost of stat was not really significant, the health bonus is almost useless because as soon as the round ends, you will lose your bonus, and if the unit has taken too much damage, the unit will succumb to its wound, regardless of the amount of health that you've given it. So all those factors makes temporary stat boost pretty bad, unless you can attack with a unit right away. There's an exception to this is Cunning, but Cunning as this advance, first of all, the stat boost is really insane, +4 attack, and also Cunning also has other effects that allows it to protect your unit. You can discard a card to remove get rid of a removal. You can bounce a unit that could attack the unit. There's a lot of things you can do to kind of protect the unit. So I see this card a little bit similarly to Cunning in the sense that it's a card that is going to give a huge stat boost to something, and you're playing this in a timing window where you know that the unit is not going to be able to be interacted with, and then you can attack and give a +4 attack bonus on with a single card, which is pretty powerful. Obviously, it is a million times less flexible than Cunning, and Cunning has way other qualities than this. So obviously, it is not even close to be on the same power level, but it is still, in my opinion, a pretty playable card. I think what makes this card way more playable than the previous temporary stat boost we've seen is the fact that the boost is really significant on a single card. It's like a +4 attack bonus on the single card. Attack Pattern Delta had the inconvenience of requiring a very wide board set, and was also double command. That was a really big constraint. This card does not have the same constraint, can be played in a wider different deck. So I think this card is playable. I give it a 5 out of 10. It's still a little bit shaky and very situational, but I think in the right situation, +4 attack for on a single card is no joke. Next we got the Incinerator Trooper. So this is one of these cards that require an upgrade to be good. Obviously on its own, it's absolutely trash. Like there's very few units you can be able to kill with that dude without this unit dying. But obviously once you start putting some upgrades on this card, then the cards start to become a lot more attractive, because then it becomes kind of this Han Solo kind of effect, which can become very powerful. Also, it is Imperial and Trooper, so you can boost that unit with like Tarkin. There's ways you can make this card a little bit threatening. I think as a 3/3, it still is going to be difficult to play. At the 4/4, it starts becoming like a much bigger threat. Um, you can put like something like an entrench on it, and then it can become like something that just kills stuff after stuff. I think it's going to be very situational. I think it's going to be difficult to play this in practice simply because having to put this unit into play, it's going to be super vulnerable for at least a turn, and then it's going to be hard to put upgrades on it, and even if you manage to put upgrades on it, it's going to be vulnerable to tons of different removals. So in theory, I can see a world where this card can be very good, uh, unfortunately, in a realistic scenario on a constructed game, it's very unlikely that this card is going to be good. So in my opinion, I rate this card a 2 out of 10 for all those reasons. Next, we got Protector of the Throne. So Protector of the Throne um, basically is kind of like a 2/4 for 3 Sentinel, but conditional because it needs to be upgraded to actually gain the Sentinel. Uh, already, Guild Cloud City Guard is not considered to be an amazing card. It does see play a little bit sometimes, but it's not considered a very good card. And it's a 2/4 for 3 unconditional. This one is 2/4 for 3 conditional, making this card pretty mediocre to say the least. Obviously, it's white, so it can be played in a wider diversity of different decks. Um, but yeah, no, this card is pretty mediocre. I rate this card a 3 out of 10 because I thought this card was a 3/4. But it's a 2/4, so no, it should be lower than this. It should be probably a 1 out of 10. I'm sorry about this. I misread the stat on that card. Next, we got Mandalorian Warrior, and this card is a lot more attractive than the previous one because we're talking about a card that has not great stats, but not horrible stats. It has an immediate impact on the game because it comes into play given experience token. Only works on Mandalorian, but I think you would only want to play this card in the Mandalorian. Is universally can be played in any deck. The fact that once again, the same way the other card, the experience token is an upgrade, and there's a lot of Mandalorian that gets a bonus for being upgraded. So this card, I would say, it's almost better than the 1/2 for 2 that give an upgrade, that gives an experience. This card is pretty much the same thing, but it's a 3/3 for 3, which is a much more attractive stat line. It cannot give the experience token to itself, but I think it's not that big of a deal because it's a 3-drop, so you can play 2-drop and then play this guy after and give that upgrade. So I don't think it's amazing, but it's in the upgrade Mandalorian deck, I think it's playable. So I gave it a 5 out of 10. Next we got Rich Reward. So Rich Reward is not the best of the bounty effect we've seen. I mean, the effect of giving experience to 2 different units is very strong, but the problem is you need to have uh, 2 units in play to be able to take full advantage of that bonus. And it does cost 1 resources. In my opinion, there's a massive difference in power level between bounty card that cost 0 and bounty card that cost 1. But it has a major advantage over the other bounty effect is the fact that it has no aspect requirement, which means that it can be played without aspect penalty in any deck. And this is, in my opinion, quite valuable because it means that a bounty deck that wants to have more of those bounty effects, has the option to play that card. So maybe they're going to release like plenty of other bounty cards that are going to make this card useless. But as of now, if you want to build a bounty deck and have a significant amount of bounty cards, I feel like Rich Reward is going to be needed for those kind of decks. I could be completely wrong about this, but this is kind of how I see it for now. Once again, who knows how many bounty effect they're going to release in the future, but having a bounty effect that can be played in anything sounds pretty valuable to me. Maybe once again you're not going to need more than 6 bounty effect, in which case this card is going to be useless. I don't know, but for now I give it a 5 out of 10. Next we're finishing off with a leader, a common leader. It is Hondo Onaka. So Hondo Onaka basically gives experience token every time you smuggle a card, up to once a turn because you have to exhaust the card. And as a stat line, it is basically a 3/7 for 6 with raid 1. So it is but raid 1, so it's 4-7 for 6 pretty much, which has been kind of the standard now for a lot of leaders. As I said earlier, it's been a very long time since I've been impressed by a leader. Like I think the last leader, like even in Spark of Rebellion, if I remember correctly, Han Solo was the last leader I was actually impressed by, and all the strong leaders that you see in the meta were basically spoiled beforehand. Like for example, the Vaders, the anyway. All my point, what I'm trying to say is like I haven't been impressed by a leader on Star Wars Limited for a very long time. And none of the leaders from Shadow of the Galaxy have impressed me particularly. I mean, I think the best of the one we've seen so far is probably the Mandalorian, and I think the Boba Daimyo has some potential, but yeah, I'm simply not very impressed by the leaders that we have seen so far from in Star Wars Unlimited. And Hondo Naka is no exception. Actually, it might be the worst leaders that I've seen. He's just simply just not great on any level. His ability is very situational, and you need to have a small gold unit. Basically, by playing a small gold unit, you're basically playing two extras. Like compare this to, for example, to a Gram of Takin, which can give experience all the time just by paying one. This is just far more valuable. Um, and yeah, and this the stat line is also very underwhelming. We've seen a lot of leaders, for example, Boba Daimyo is also a 4-7 for 6, but Boba Daimyo at least has this ability which I think is super valuable. Here the ability just seems pretty mediocre. You have to play a lot of small gold cards to make this worth it. I haven't been particularly impressed by small gold cards so far either. So all those factors combined makes Ondo Naka simply just not a very good card in my opinion, at least from my first impression that I have. So I rate this leader a 1 out of 10. This is the lowest rating I've given to a leader so far for Shadow of the Galaxy. And that's it. So if you disagree with anything I say, please feel free to voice it on the comments below. Or so I hope you are still enjoying me going through those different spoilers. This time around we had a lot of weak cards. I think it was a lot of commons and starter cards that were meant for the starter deck. So we still haven't seen many legendaries being shown. So I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of strong cards going on with those as we get to those highest rarity cards. And I'm hoping for some stronger leaders as well because at the end of the day, those leaders need to be able to challenge the current leaders that we have right now, which are fairly powerful. They need to be able to challenge the Bobas, the Vaders, the Sabine, and all that stuff. So obviously we're gonna hopefully this happens in this set as well. Thank you for following that video, and so those who are interested, I will also post the schedule for my coaching service on the description below. Thanks everybody. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.